Today is the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, a day to recognize and remember the legacy of residential schools, the victims and their survivors, as well as their families and communities. The residential school system has unquestionably impacted the lives of Indigenous people in countless ways and led to the underrepresentation of Indigenous people across all systems, especially the education system. For over 3 decades, Actua has been working with educators, Indigenous leaders, communities, and youth to create sustainable and meaningful change to improve the educational experience of Indigenous youth. Our work acknowledges the tragic history of residential schools and the ongoing impacts, and also serves to address the current need to dismantle and remove barriers to Indigenous education.
Bonjour, Ani, Sego, Wache. Greetings. My name is Dokis. I'm the director of Actua's National Youth InSTEM program. Coming to you today from the mountains of Alberta in the Treaty 7 region, and just as a reminder of Truth and Reconciliation Day across Canada, as we look back at the impacts that residential schools and colonialism has had on Canada and continues to have on Indigenous youth in Canada. We wanted to send you a message today on the work that we've been doing at Actua for over the past 30 years in helping bring Indigenous youth back on the land for programming that is directly related to cultural learning and STEM. Actua is a national organization, charity that serves over 200 Indigenous communities and about 35,000 Indigenous youth annually. All of that work is focusing on reconciliation, bringing communities, Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people together in a way that history typically hasn't done through the education system. Indigenous youth continue to this day to be impacted by the residential schools and the education system in particular. Here at Actua, we continue to work with communities to try and instill the importance of Indigenous knowledge, and particularly land-based knowledge for Indigenous youth. Today, we're in the mountains of Alberta with about 32 Indigenous youth from the Treaty 7 region and Treaty 6 region for land-based STEM education, where those youths will receive a high school credit, as well as learning from local Indigenous elders and STEM practitioners the linkages between Indigenous knowledge and STEM. Indigenous people have always known about STEM and passed that on through their cultural practices throughout history. We're constantly reminded of the impacts of colonialism, particularly recently here in Canada. So as we reflect back today on reconciliation, we have to keep in mind that in order for reconciliation to happen truly, there needs to be truth. And we need to teach our young people, Indigenous and non-Indigenous alike, the truth of the impacts of colonialism, the monarchies on Canada, and how we continue to try and overcome the mistakes of the past, but at the same time build off of those things moving forward. So today, on behalf of Actua and myself, I'd like to reach out to everybody and say that reconciliation is not something that we should be visiting once a year on a designated day, but yet we should be practicing it on a day-to-day basis, and that starts with truth and an understanding of the true history of Canada and its relationships with Indigenous people. Chimagwich.
I'd like to thank the Indigenous communities, the elders, the knowledge keepers, and the youth who have trusted us and allowed us to listen to your stories as we continue to work for a more equitable education experience for all youth. I encourage you to read the 94 calls to action in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report, and take every opportunity to learn about the rich culture and history of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We need more Indigenous perspectives in STEM. Doing that and continuing to focus on removing the barriers to Indigenous engagement in education will increase the economic and social prosperity for all Canadians.
This is what we need. This is what we needed like 10 years ago.